Our great Queen in the presence of the Lord pleads for the hastening of the incarnation and of the redemption of man, and His Majesty yields to her prayer. The heavenly Princess, Most Holy Mary, had now attained such fullness of grace and beauty, and the heart of God was so wounded by her tender affections and desires, Canticles 4:9, that He was so to say irresistibly drawn to begin His flight from the bosom of the Eternal Father to the bridal chamber of her virginal womb, and end the long delay of more than 5,000 years. Nevertheless, since this new wonder was to be executed in the plenitude of His wisdom and equity, the Lord arranged this event in such a way that the Princess of the heavens herself, being the worthy mother of the incarnate Word, should at the same time be also the most powerful mediatrix of His coming and the Redeemer of His people, much more than Esther was of Israel. Esther chapter 7 and 8. In the heart of Most Holy Mary burned the flame, which God Himself had enkindled, and without intermission she prayed for the salvation of the human race. However, as yet the most humble lady restrained herself in modesty, knowing that on account of the sin of Adam, the sentence of death and of eternal privation from the vision of God had been promulgated. Genesis 3:19. A heavenly strife thus arose in the most pure heart of Mary between her love and her humility, and lost in these sentiments, she repeated many times, quote, "Oh, who shall be able to secure the salvation of my brethren? Oh, who shall be able to draw from the bosom of the Eternal Father His only begotten, and make Him a partaker of our mortality? Oh, who shall oblige Him to give to our human nature the kiss of His mouth, for which the bride asks Him?" Canticles 1:1. But how can we, the children and descendants of the malefactor who committed the crime, ask for this favor? How can we draw him towards us, whom our fathers repelled? O my love, if I could but see thee at the breasts of thy mother, the human nature. Canticles 8:1. O light of lights, God of the true God, would that thou descend, bending down the heavens. Psalms 143:5, and shedding thy light upon those that live sitting in darkness. Isaiah 9:2. Would that thou pacify thy father, and by thy right hand, that is, by his only begotten, hurl the proud Ammon, thy enemy, the devil, from his height. Who shall be the mediatrix, who shall draw from the celestial altar, as with tongs of gold, Isaiah 6:6, that ember of the divinity for the purification of the world, as once did the seraphim, according to the word of the prophet Isaiah. This prayer Most Holy Mary repeated during the 8th day of her preparation, and at midnight, being rapt and entranced in the Lord, she heard His Majesty responding to her, quote, "My spouse and my dove, come, my chosen one, for the common law does not apply to thee." Esther 15:13. Thou art exempt from sin, and thou art free from its effects since the moment of thy conception. When I gave being to thee, I turned away from thee the scepter of my justice, and laid upon thy neck that of my great clemency, in order that the general edict of sin might not touch thee. Come to me, and be not dismayed in the consciousness of thy human nature. I am He that raises the humble, and fills with riches those that are poor. Thou hast me for thy friend, and my liberal mercy shall be at thy disposal." Unquote. These words our Queen heard intellectually, as in the preceding night. She presently felt herself raised by the holy angels bodily to heaven, while in her stead remained one of the angels of her guard. Again she ascended to the presence of the Most High, so enriched by the treasures of His graces and gifts, so fortunate and beautiful, that she singularly excited the wonder of the supernal spirits. They broke out in praise of the Almighty, saying, quote, "Who is this that ascends from the desert, overflowing with delights?" Canticles 8:5. Who is she that so attracts and compels her beloved as to bear him with her to the earthly habitation? Who is she that rises as the dawn, more beautiful than the moon chosen as the sun? Canticles 6:9. How refulgent does she rise from the darkness of the earth! How is she so courageous and strong, being clothed in such fragile nature? How does she in her strength overcome the Almighty? And how comes it that the heavens, which are closed against the children of Adam, are thus thrown open to this singular woman, sprung from the same race?" Unquote. The Most High received His holy and chosen bride, Most Holy Mary, into His presence. Although this happened not in an intuitive, but in an abstractive vision of the divinity, it was accompanied with incomparable favors of light and purification proceeding from the Lord Himself, such as were specially reserved for this day. for they were so divine that in our way of speaking, God himself who wrought them was astonished and charmed with the work of his hand. As if entranced with love, he spoke to her and said, quote, Reveritari, reveritari sulamitus ut intiamur te. My Latin, I don't know any. Return, return, O Sulamitus, that we may behold thee, is what it means. My spouse, my most perfect and beloved dove, pleasing in my sight, turn and advance toward us, that we may behold thee and be charmed by thy beauty. I do not regret to have created man, and I delight in his formation, since thou hast been born of him. Let my celestial spirits see how justly I have desired and do desire to choose thee as my spouse and the queen of all the creatures. Let them see what good reason I have to rejoice in this my bridal chamber, from whence my only begotten, next to that of my own bosom, shall derive the greatest glory. Let all understand that if I justly repudiated Eve, the first queen of the earth, on account of her disobedience, I now place thee and establish thee in the highest dignity, showing my magnificence and power in dealing with thy purest humility and self-abasement. Unquote. This day was for the angels a day of jubilation and rejoicing greater than any since their creation. And when the most blessed Trinity thus chose and appointed his spouse and mother of the Word for the queen and lady of the creatures, the holy angels and all the celestial courts of spirits acknowledged and received her as their mistress and superior, and they sung sweet hymns of glory and honor and in praise of her author. During these hidden and admirable mysteries of the heavenly Queen Mary, during these hidden and admirable mysteries, the heavenly Queen Mary was absorbed in the abyss of the divinity and in the light of his infinite perfections, and thereby the Lord prevented her from attending to all that happened. Thus the sacrament of her mothership of the only begotten still remained hidden to her until the proper time. Never did the Lord deal in such a manner with any nation. Psalms 147:20. Nor did he ever show himself so great and powerful in any creature as on this day in Most Holy Mary. The Most High added yet other favors, saying to her with extreme condescension, quote, My chosen spouse, since thou hast found grace in my eyes, ask of me without restraint what thou desirest, and I assure thee, as the most faithful God and powerful King, that I shall not reject thy petitions, nor deny thee what thou askest. Unquote. Our great princess humiliated herself profoundly, and relying on the promise and royal word of the Lord, and inspired with highest confidence, she answered, saying, quote, My Lord and highest God, if I have found grace in thy eyes, Genesis 18:3-27, although I am dust and ashes, I will speak in thy divine presence and pour out to thee my heart. Unquote. Psalm 61:9. Again his majesty assured her and commanded her to ask in the presence of all the heavenly court for whatever she desired, even if it were to be a part of his kingdom. Esther 5:3. Quote, I do not ask, O Lord, for a part of thy kingdom in my own behalf, unquote, answered Most Holy Mary. Quote, but I ask for the whole of it for all the human race, all the race of men who are my brothers. I beseech thee, highest and powerful King, that according to thy immense kindness thou send us thy only begotten, our Redeemer, in order that he may satisfy for the sins of all the world, that thy people may gain the freedom so much desired, and that, through the satisfaction thus rendered to thy justice, peace may be declared among men upon earth. Ezekiel 34:25. And that the portals of heaven, closed by sin, may be thrown open for its inhabitants. Let all flesh see thy salvation. Isaiah 52:10. Let peace and justice give each other that close embrace and the kiss which David asked for. Psalms 84:11. Let us mortals possess a teacher, a guide and a savior. Isaiah 30:20. A chief who shall live and dwell with us. Baruch 3:38. Let the day of thy promises draw upon us, O my God. Let the words be fulfilled, and let the Messiah, expected for so many ages, arrive. These are my anxious desires, and for this do I breathe forth my sighs, since thou showest to me the condescension of thy infinite clemency. Unquote. The highest Lord, who wished to bind himself by her prayer, disposed and incited the petitions of his beloved spouse benignly. He inclined toward her and answered her with singular clemency, quote, Pleasing to my will are thy requests, and acceptable are thy petitions. It shall be done as thou askest. I desire, my daughter and spouse, that thou seekest and as a pledge of this, I give thee my word and promise thee, that very shortly my only begotten shall descend to the earth, and shall vest himself and unite himself with the human nature. Thus thy acceptable wishes shall be executed and fulfilled." Unquote. With this assurance and divine promise, our great Queen Princess felt new enlightenment and security in her spirit, convincing her that the end of that long, protracted, and prolix night of sin and of the ancient law was approaching, and that the brightness of human redemption was about to dawn. And because the rays of the Sun of Justice, whose dawn was soon to arise from her, so closely and so intensely enveloped her about, she became herself the most beautiful aurora, inflamed and refulgent, as it were, with the fiery clouds of the divinity, which transformed all things within her. All afire with love and gratitude for the approaching redemption, she gave unceasing praise to the Lord, both in her own name and in that of all the mortals. In this occupation she passed that day, after the angels had restored her to the earth. I must grieve at my ignorance and shortcomings in explaining these so exalted mysteries, and if learned men and great students cannot give an adequate explanation of these things, how shall it be given by a poor and lowly woman? May my ignorance be supplemented by the light of Christian charity, and my presumption be atoned for by my obedience. Instruction which Holy Mary, the Queen, gave me. My dearest daughter, how far removed is worldly wisdom from the admirable operations of the divine power in these sacraments of the incarnation of the divine Word in my womb. Flesh and blood cannot reach them, and not the angels and seraphim, though they be of the highest, nor can they know mysteries so deeply hidden and so far above the ordinary course of grace. Praise thou, my beloved, the Lord for them with incessant love and thankfulness. Be thou not any longer slow in understanding the greatness of his divine love and his readiness to benefit his friends and dear ones, whom he desires to elevate from the dust and enrich in diverse manners. As soon as thou hast penetrated into this truth, it will oblige thee to thank him and incite thee to undertake the great things that become a most faithful daughter and spouse. And in order that thou mayest dispose thyself and be inspired so much the more, I remind thee that the Lord often says these same words to his chosen ones. It's the Latin quote from earlier. For he derives just as great pleasure from their deeds as when a father rejoices in his beloved and well-behaved son, whom he looks upon many times with great affection, or as an artist when he beholds with pride the perfect works of his hands, or as a king who inspects the rich city which he has added to his dominions, or as one who is pleased with his much-beloved friend. There is only this difference. The Most High finds incomparably more delight than all these in the souls which he has chosen for his blessing, and in proportion as they dispose themselves and advance in virtue, the Lord also multiplies his favors and benefits. If the mortals that attain to the light of faith would enter into this truth, they would, merely on account of this complacence of the Almighty in their good deeds, not only preserve themselves from sin, but they would zealously engage in great works until death, and eagerly show their loving servitude to him who is so liberal in rewarding and so generous in his favors. When on this 8th day, which thou hast described, the Lord in heaven spoke to me these words, Reveretere, reveretere, asking me to turn toward him and allow the celestial spirits to look upon me, I was made aware that the pleasure which his divine majesty derived in beholding me by itself exceeded all the delight and complacency which he ever derived from all the most saintly souls in the height of their sanctity. In his gracious condescension he was more pleased in me than in all the apostles, martyrs, confessors, virgins, and all the rest of the saints. And this pleasure and complacency of the Most High overflowed and enriched my spirit with such an influx of grace and participation of the divinity that thou canst neither understand nor explain it as long as thou art in mortal flesh. But I tell thee of this hidden mystery, in order that thou mayest bless its author, and that, while yet thy exile from the fatherland continues, thou dispose and exert thyself in my place and name to extend and reach out thy hands to great things. Proverbs 31:19. Give to the Lord the satisfaction expected of thee, and strive after it, thus earning his blessings and soliciting them for thyself and thy neighbor with perfect charity. the Most High renews all his favors and benefits in the Most Holy Mary, and as the ultimate preparation for the Incarnation, makes her sovereign and queen of all the universe. On the last day of the novena of immediate preparation of the tabernacle, Psalms 45:5, which he was to sanctify by his coming, the Most High resolved to renew his wonders and multiply his tokens of love, repeating the favors and benefits which up to this day he had conferred upon the Princess Mary. But the Almighty chose to work in such a way that in drawing forth from his infinite treasures his gifts of old, he always added thereto such as were new. All of these different kinds of wonders were appropriate to the end he had in view, lowering his divinity to the human nature and raising a woman to the dignity of Mother of God. In descending to the lowliness of man's estate, God neither could nor needed to change his essence, for remaining immutable in himself, he could unite his person to our nature. But an earthly woman, in ascending to such an excellence that God should unite with her and become man of her substance, apparently must traverse an infinite space and be raised so far above other creatures as to approach God's infinite being itself. The day had then arrived in which Most Holy Mary was to reach the last stage and be placed so close to God as to become his mother. In that night, at the hour of greatest silence, she was again called by the same Lord as had happened on the other days. The humble and prudent queen responded, quote, "My heart is prepared," Psalms 107:2. "My Lord and exalted sovereign, let thy divine pleasure be fulfilled in me," unquote. Immediately she was, as on the preceding day, borne body and soul by the hands of her angels to the Empyrean and placed in the presence of the royal throne of the Most High. And his divine majesty raised her up and seated her at his side, assigning to her the position and throne which she was to occupy forever in his presence. Next to the one reserved for the incarnate Word, it was the highest and the most proximate to God himself, for it excelled incomparably that of any of the other blessed, and that of all them together. From this position she saw the divinity by an abstractive vision, as at other times, and his majesty, hiding from her the dignity of Mother of God, manifested to her such unusual and such high sacraments that on account of their sublimity and my insignificant capacities I cannot describe them. Again she saw in the divinity all things created and many other possible and future ones. The corporal things God manifested and made known to her by corporal and sensible images, as if they had been presented to her ocular vision. The fabric of the universe, which before this she had known in parts, now appeared to her in its entirety, distinctly pictured as upon canvas, with all the creatures contained therein. She saw the harmony, order, connection, and dependence of each toward each, and of the divine will which had created them, governs and preserves them, each in its place and mode of existence. Again she saw all the heavens and the stars, the elements and those that lived in them, purgatory, limbo, hell, and all the occupants of these caverns, just as the position of the Queen of Creation was above all creatures and inferior only to that of God. Excuse me. So also the knowledge given to her was superior to that of all created things, being inferior only to that of the Lord. While thus the heavenly lady was lost in admiration of what the Almighty showed to her, and was wrapped in praise and exaltation of the Lord, his majesty spoke to her and said, quote, "My chosen dove, all the visible creatures which thou beholdest I have created and preserved in their variety and beauty by my providence, solely for the love of men. And from all the souls which I have until now created, and which are predestined to be created unto the end, I shall choose and select the congregation of the faithful, who shall be set apart and washed in the blood of the Lamb in the redemption of the world. They shall be the special fruit of his redemption, and they shall enjoy its blessings through the new law of grace and the sacraments to be instituted by the Redeemer. And afterwards those that persevere shall partake of my eternal glory and friendship. For these chosen ones I have primarily created these wonderful works, and if all of them would strive to serve me, adore and acknowledge my holy name, as far as I am concerned, I would for each and every one of them create these great treasures and assign all over to them as their possession." Wow. "And if I had created only one being capable of my grace and glory, I would have made it the Lord and Master of all creation, for this would be a much smaller favor than to make it partaker of my friendship and of eternal happiness. Thou, my spouse, shalt be my chosen one, and thou hast found grace in my sight, and therefore I make thee mistress of all these goods, and I give thee dominion and possession of them all. so that if thou art a faithful spouse according to my wishes, thou mayest distribute and dispose of them according as thou desirest, and according as thy intercessions shall direct. For this is the purpose for which they are given into thy possession." Unquote. Therewith the most blessed Trinity placed a crown on the head of our Princess Mary, consecrating her as the sovereign queen of all creation. Upon it was spread and enameled the inscription, "Mother of God," but its meaning was not known to her at this time. The heavenly spirits, however, knew it, and they were filled with admiration at the magnificence of the Lord toward this maiden, most fortunate and blessed among womankind. They revered and honored her as their legitimate queen and as sovereign of all creation. All these portents of love the right hand of the Most High wrought according to the order most befitting his infinite wisdom, for before coming down to assume flesh in the virginal womb of this lady, it was proper that all his courtiers should acknowledge his mother as their queen and mistress, and give her due honor as such. It was certainly proper and just that God should first make her queen before making her mother of the Prince of eternities, for she that was to bear a prince must necessarily first be a queen, and be acknowledged as queen by her vassals. That the angels should know her as mother was not improper, nor was there any necessity of concealing it from them. But on the other hand, it seemed due to the majesty of the divinity that the tabernacle chosen for his indwelling should appear before them prepared and adorned with all that was highest in dignity and perfection, in nobility and magnificence to the full extent in which it was possible. Thus, then, was she presented to the holy angels, and recognized by them as their honored queen and lady. In order to put the last touch to this prodigious work of preparing the Most Holy Mary, the Lord extended his powerful arm and expressly renewed the spirit and the faculties of the great lady, giving her new inclinations, habits, and qualities, the greatness and excellence of which are inexpressible in terrestrial terms. It was the finishing act and the final retouching of the living image of God, in order to form in it and of it the very shape into which the eternal Word, the essential image of the eternal Father, 2 Corinthians 4:4, and the figure of his substance, Hebrews 1:3, was to be cast. Thus the whole temple of Most Holy Mary, more so than that of Solomon, was covered with the purest gold of the divinity, inside and out. 3 Kings 6:30. So that nowhere could be seen in her any grossness of an earthly daughter of Adam. Her entire being was made to shine forth the divinity, for since the divine word was to issue from the bosom of the eternal Father to descend to that of Mary, he provided for the greatest possible similarity between the mother and the father. No words at my disposal could ever suffice to describe her as I would wish. The effects of these favors in the heart of our great queen and mistress. No words at my disposal could ever suffice to describe as I would wish the effects of these favors in the heart of our great queen and mistress. Human thought cannot conceive them. How then can human words express them? But what has caused the greatest wonder in me, when I considered these things and the light given to me, is the humility of this heavenly woman, and the mutual contest between her humility and the divine power. Rare and astonishing prodigy of humility, to see this maiden, Most Holy Mary, though raised to the supremest dignity and holiness next to God, yet humiliating herself and debasing herself below the meanest of the creatures, so that, by the force of this humility, no thought of her being destined for the mothership of the Messiah could find entrance into her mind. And not only this, she did not even have a suspicion of anything great or admirable in herself. Psalms 131. Psalms 130, and then the number 1. Her eyes and heart were not elated. On the contrary, the higher she ascended by the operation of the right hand of her God, so much the more lowly were her thoughts concerning herself. It was therefore just that the Almighty should look upon her humility, Luke 1:48, and that therefore all generations should call her fortunate and blessed. Instruction which the Queen and Mistress of Heaven gave me. My daughter, the soul that has only a selfish and servile love is not a worthy spouse of the Most High, for she must not love or fear like a slave, nor is she supposed to serve for her daily wages. Yet although her heart must be a filial and generous love, on account of the excellence and immense goodness of her spouse, she must nevertheless also feel herself much bounden to him when she considers how rich and liberal he is, how, on account of his love for souls, he has created such a variety of visible goods in order that they might serve those who serve him, and especially when she considers how many hidden treasures he has in readiness in the abundance of his sweetness. Psalms 30:20, for those that fear him as his true children. I wish that thou feel deeply obliged to thy Lord and Father, thy spouse and friend, at the thought of the riches given to those souls who become his dearest children. For as a powerful Father, he holds in readiness these great and manifold gifts for his children, and if necessary, all of his gifts for each one of them in particular. In the midst of such motives and incentives of love, and the disaffection of men is inexcusable, and at the sight of so many blessings given without measure, their ingratitude is unpardonable. Remember also, my dearest, that thou wast no foreigner or stranger in this house of the Lord, his holy church, Ephesians 2:19, but thou wast made a domestic and a spouse of Christ among the saints, favored by his gifts and by the dowry of a bride. Since all the treasures and riches of the bridegroom belong to the legitimate spouse, consider of how great possessions he makes thee participant and mistress. Enjoy them all, then, as his domestic, and be zealous for his honor as a much favored daughter and spouse. Thank him for all these works and benefits, as if they have all been prepared for thee alone by the Lord. Love and reverence him for thyself and for all thy neighbors, to whom God has been so liberal. In all this imitate with thy weak faculties that which thou hast understood of what I have done. I assure thee also, daughter, that it will be very pleasing to me, if thou magnify and praise the Omnipotent with fervent affection for the favors and riches which, beyond all human conception, the divine right hand showered upon me. The Blessed Trinity sends the Archangel Gabriel as a messenger to announce to Most Holy Mary that she is chosen as the Mother of God. For infinite ages had been appointed the convenient hour and time in which the great mystery of piety, 1 Timothy 3:16, which was approved by the Spirit, prophesied to men, foretold to the angels, and expected in the world, was to be drawn from the hidden recesses of the divine wisdom in order to be appropriately manifested in the flesh. The plenitude of time, Galatians 4:4, had arrived, that time which until then, although filled with prophecies and promises, was nevertheless void and empty, for it wanted the fullness of the Most Holy Mary, by whose will and consent all the ages were to receive their complement, namely, the eternal Word made flesh, capable of suffering and redeeming man. Before all ages, this mystery was prearranged in such a way that it should be fulfilled through the mediation of this heavenly maiden. Since now she existed in the world, the redemption of man and the coming of the only begotten of the Father was not longer to be delayed, for now he would not need to come and live as if by sufferance merely in tents, 2 Kings 7:6, or in a strange house, but he could enjoy a free welcome as in his temple and as in his own house, one that had been built and enriched at his own preordained expense, more so than the temple of Solomon at the expense of his father David. In this predetermined time, then, the Most High resolved to send his only begotten Son into the world, and comparing, according to our way of understanding and speaking, the decrees of his eternity with the prophecies and testimonies made to man from the beginning of the world, and all this together with the position of sanctity to which he had raised Most Holy Mary, he judged that all the circumstances were favorable for the exaltation of his holy name, and that the execution of his eternal will and decree should be made manifest to the angels and be commenced by them. His Majesty spoke to the Archangel Gabriel in such words or language as he was accustomed to use in intimating his will to the holy angels. Although God usually illumines the holy spirits by commencing with the higher angels, who in turn purify and illumine the others in their order, down to the least among them, thus making known the revelations of the divinity, yet on this occasion this usage was not maintained, for the holy archangel received his message immediately from the mouth of God. At the bidding of the divine will, the holy Gabriel presented himself at the foot of the throne, intent upon the immutable essence of the Most High. His Majesty then expressly charged him with the message which he was to bring to the Most Holy Mary, and instructed him in the very words with which he was to salute and address her. Thus, the first author of the message was God himself, who formed the exact words in his divine mind, and revealed them to the holy archangel for transmission to the most pure Mary. At the same time, the Lord revealed to the holy Prince Gabriel many hidden sacraments concerning the Incarnation. The blessed Trinity commanded him to betake himself to the heavenly maiden, and announced to her that the Lord had chosen her among women to be the mother of the eternal Word, that she should conceive him in her virginal womb through operation of the Holy Ghost without injury to her virginity. In this, and in all the rest of the message which he was to declare and manifest to this great Queen and Mistress, the Archangel was instructed by the blessed Trinity itself. Thereupon his Majesty announced to all the other angels that the time of the redemption had come, and that he had commanded it to be brought to the world without delay, for already, in their own presence, the Most Holy Mary had been prepared and adorned to be his mother, and had been exalted to this supreme dignity. The heavenly spirits heard the voice of their Creator, and with incomparable joy and thanksgiving for the fulfillment of his eternal and perfect will, they intoned new canticles of praise, repeating therein that hymn of Sion, quote, Holy, holy, holy art thou, God and Lord, Sabaoth, Isaiah 6:3. Just and powerful art thou, Lord our God, who livest in the highest, Psalms 112:5, and lookest upon the lowly of the earth. Admirable are thy works, most high and exalted in thy designs. Unquote. The supernal Prince Gabriel, obeying with singular delight the divine command, and accompanied by many thousands of most beautiful angels in visible forms, descended from the highest heaven. The appearance of the great prince and legate was that of a most handsome youth of rarest beauty. His face emitted resplendent rays of light. His bearing was grave and majestic, his advance measured, his motions composed, his words weighty and powerful. His whole presence displayed a pleasing, kindly gravity, and more of godlike qualities than all the other angels until then seen in visible form by the heavenly mistress. He wore a diadem of exquisite splendor, and his vestments glowed in various colors full of refulgent beauty. Encased on his breast he bore a most beautiful cross, disclosing the mystery of the Incarnation, which he had come to announce. All these circumstances were calculated to rivet the affectionate attention of the most prudent Queen. The whole of this celestial army, with their princely leader, holy Gabriel, directed their flight to Nazareth, a town of the province of Galilee, to the dwelling place of Most Holy Mary. This was an humble cottage, and her chamber was a narrow room, bare of all those furnishings which are wont to be used by the world in order to hide its own meanness and want of all higher goods. The heavenly mistress was at this time 14 years, 6 months, and 17 days of age, for her birthday anniversary fell on the 8th of September, and 6 months, 17 days had passed since that date, when this greatest of all mysteries ever performed by God in this world was enacted in her. Today is the 8th of September, and is the birthday of Holy Mary. Happy birthday, Mother Mary. The bodily shape of the heavenly queen was well proportioned and taller than is usual with other maidens of her age, yet extremely elegant and perfect in all its parts. Her face was rather more oblong than round, gracious and beautiful, without leanness or grossness, its complexion clear, yet of a slightly brownish hue, her forehead spacious, yet symmetrical, her eyebrows perfectly arched, her eyes large and serious, of incredible and ineffable beauty and dove-like sweetness, dark in color with a mixture tending toward green, her nose straight and well-shaped, her mouth small with red-colored lips, neither too thin nor too thick. All the gifts of nature in her were so symmetrical and beautiful that no other human being ever had the like. To look upon her caused feelings at the same time of joy and seriousness, love and reverential fear. She attracted the heart and yet restrained it in sweet reverence. Her beauty impelled the tongue to sound her praise, and yet her grandeur and her overwhelming perfections and graces hushed it to silence. In all that approached her, she caused divine effects not easily explained. She filled the heart with heavenly influences and divine operations tending toward the divinity. Her garments were humble and poor, yet clean, of a dark silvery hue, somewhat like the color of ashes, and they were arranged and worn without pretense, but with the greatest modesty and propriety. At the time when, without her noticing it, the embassy of heaven drew nigh unto her, she was engaged in the highest contemplation concerning the mysteries which the Lord had renewed in her by so many favors during the 9 preceding days. And since, as we have said above, the Lord himself had assured her that his only begotten would soon descend to assume human form, this great queen was full of fervent joy and affection in the expectation of its execution, and inflamed with humble love. She spoke in her heart, quote, "Is it possible that the blessed time is arrived, in which the word of the eternal Father is to be born and to converse with men?" Baruch 10:38. That the world should possess him, that men are to see him in the flesh. Isaiah 40 and the number 5. That his inaccessible light is to shine forth to illumine those who sit in darkness. Isaiah 9:2. Oh, who shall be worthy to see and to know him? Oh, who shall be allowed to kiss the earth touched by his feet? Rejoice, ye heavens, and console thyself, O earth. Psalms 95:11. Let all things bless and extol him, since already his eternal happiness is nigh. O children of Adam, afflicted with sin, and yet creatures of my beloved, now shall you rise your heads and throw off the yoke of your ancient servitude. Isaiah 14:25. O ye ancient forefathers and prophets, and all ye just that are detained in limbo and are waiting in the bosom of Abraham, now shall you be consoled, and your much desired and long promised Redeemer shall tarry no longer. Let us magnify him and sing to him hymns of praise. O who shall be the slave of her whom Isaiah pointed out as his mother? Isaiah 7:4. O Emmanuel, true God and man, O key of David, who art to unlock heaven. Isaiah 22:22. O eternal wisdom, O lawgiver of the new church, come to us, O Lord, and in the captivity of thy people, let all flesh see thy salvation. Unquote. Isaiah 40 and the number 5. In these petitions and aspirations, and in many more too deep for my tongue to explain, the most holy Mary was engaged at the hour when the holy angel Gabriel arrived. She was most pure in soul, most perfect in body, most noble in her sentiments, most exalted in sanctity, full of grace, and so deified and pleasing in the sight of God that she was fit to be his mother, and an instrument adapted for drawing him from the bosom of the Father to her virginal womb. She was the powerful means of our redemption, and to her we owe it on many accounts. And therefore it is just that all generations and nations shall bless and forever extol her. Luke 1:48. What happened at the entrance of the heavenly embassy I will relate in the following chapter. I wish only to state here a fact worthy of admiration, that for the reception of the message of the archangel, and for the execution of the exalted mystery, which was to be wrought in the heavenly lady by her consent, his majesty left her without any other aid than the resources of her common human nature, and those furnished her by the faculties and virtues of her ordinary condition, such as have been described in the first part of this history. The Most High disposed it thus, because this mystery was to be enacted as a sacrament of faith conjointly with hope and charity, and therefore the Lord provided her with no special aid, leaving her to her belief and hope in his divine promises. Thus prepared, she experienced what I shall try to relate in my inadequate and limited terms. The greatness of these sacraments makes my ability to explain them appear so much the more insufficient. Instruction of the Queen of Heaven. My daughter, with special affection, I manifest to thee now my will and desire that thou make thyself worthy of the intimate and familiar converse with God, and that for this purpose thou dispose thyself with great zeal and solicitude, weeping over thy sins, and forgetting and rejecting all the visible things, so that thou have no thought henceforth for any other thing outside of God. Therefore thou must begin to practice all that I have taught thee until now, and whatever I will yet teach thee in the balance of this history. I will accompany thee and guide thee on the course with which thou must maintain in this familiar intercourse, and in regard to the favors which thou receivest through his condescension, entertaining him in thy heart by means of the faith, light, and grace given to thee. If thou dost not first conform to this my admonition, and prepare thyself accordingly, Thou wilt not reach the fulfillment of thy desires, nor shall I reap the fruit of my instructions, which I give to thee as thy teacher. Since thou hast found, without any merit of thine, the hidden treasure and the precious pearl of my teaching and instruction, Matthew 13:44, despise all other things, in order to possess and secure for thyself this prize of inestimable value, for with it thou shalt receive all other goods, and thou wilt make thyself worthy of the intimate friendship of the Lord and of his perpetual indwelling in your heart. In exchange for this great blessing, I desire that thou die to all earthly things, and that thou offer the thankful love of an entirely purified will. In imitation of me, be thou so humble that as far as thou art concerned, thou be persuaded and convinced of thy entire worthlessness and incapability, not meriting to be considered even as a slave of the servants of Christ. Remember, I was far from imagining that the Most High had designed me for the dignity of Mother of God, and this was my state of mind, although he had already promised his speedy coming into the world, and although he had commanded me to desire after him with such great affection, that on the day before the execution of this mystery, I thought I would die, and my heart would burst with loving sighs, if the divine providence had not comforted me. He dilated my spirit with the firm hope that the only begotten of the Eternal Father would descend from heaven without delay. Yet, on the other hand, my humility inclined me to fear lest my presence in the world might perhaps retard his coming. Contemplate then, my beloved, this secret of my breast, and what an example it is for thee and for all the mortals. And since it is difficult for thee to understand and describe such high wisdom, look upon me in the Lord, in order that by his divine light thou mayest meditate and comprehend the perfection of my actions. Follow me by imitating me, and walk in my footsteps. Praise and glory be to God in the highest. May God bless and keep you.